I am so excited to finally be talking about my most anticipated horror movie of the year. Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. You heard correctly, we are finally talking about Maxxxine that was finally released here in the UK. This, as you will probably all know, is the third installment in the X franchise created by Ty West and I suppose a little bit by Mia Goth as well. This was my most anticipated horror film of the year, so did it live up to my expectations? Well, first of all, I have to say, kind of mixed on this one, and this is the problem with going into a film with such high expectations, is that they're never going to live up to them. So Maxxxine for me is definitely a mixed bag. We are going to look at some positives and we're going to look at some negatives, but everything is going to be spoiler free, so if you haven't seen the film yet, then don't worry, you can keep watching. The first thing I want to talk about in terms of positives is that this is a film that is certainly a love letter to fans of the X trilogy. This is a love letter and kind of a thank you, I suppose, to people who are a fan of this franchise, but of Maxxxine as a character. We definitely are given a satisfying conclusion to her story, I would say. I know I've heard some people say that it's not satisfying, but to me, I think that if you followed Maxxxine through these films, and if you followed Pearl's journey through these films, which has always been Maxxine's mirror image, Maxxxine gives us a satisfying conclusion to her story. It is also a love letter to fans of horror, to fans of giallo, and to fans of true crime, because this is, I would say, kind of a mixed bag between horror and crime thriller and sort of pre-horror classic Hollywood styling. There's lots of nods to tropes of the horror genre, but there's also lots of nods to things like creators, actors, film studios, sets, things like that to do within the horror world, but also within the world of giallo. There is a character within this that is masked and shrouded in black with leather black gloves like the villains of the giallo films, but there's also lots of nods to true crime. There's mentions of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and also it's very like things like Zodiac and Seven, or gritty thrillers of the 70s or gritty thrillers of the 80s, where it is very much focused on the crime aspect. You are in Hollywood, in LA, but you are in think of Scream 3, where you're in the underbelly of Hollywood and you are surrounded by the worst of humanity and the crimes that they commit. There's lots of detective and police characters in this. So it is less straight horror than X was, but it really, really works for this film because I love that it is in that Hollywood setting. I love that it's on film studios, it's behind the scenes of films, as we as film lovers do often like to see. It's like the Wizard of Oz peeping behind the curtain. And as with every single installment in this film, Maxxxine has its own style, it has its own flavour, and it has its own I don't want to say commentary or message, but say, you know, with X, it was very much stylized to feel like it was just picked out of the 70s. Pearl was also very reminiscent of things like The Wizard of Oz, with Technicolor coming in, and each one was completely different to the other. Maxxxine is no different. This one is very much settled and rooted in the 80s and has its own style, but is very different to X, is very different to Pearl. But while each one is completely different in terms of style, they do all work and fit together. So the fact that this one feels nothing like X, it feels nothing like Pearl, that is not to its detriment. That is to be expected because it is just following suit. Ty West, I think, my hat goes off to him, like tip of the hat, because this is a movie creator who is very willing to explore, he's very willing to experiment, and while he's making this trilogy, that rules sort of set that it has to all gel, it has to feel like it belongs within them, as in there's like a consistency in style. He just does the opposite, and he makes each film more different than the last one. But it gives him the opportunity to play around and really get creative, but also to give the audience different examples of what he can create. So with it being set in the 80s, my God, one of the highlights of this film to me is just how incredible the costumes are, the props, the setting, the makeup, everything, the soundtrack, the songs that are picked for this film are absolutely perfect. I think that the costumes and the outfits are absolutely fantastic. The props and the dressing of everything, just the locations as well. I mean, you know, you have these really sort of seedy rundown buildings, but then you also have, I don't know what it's called, the road with all the stars on, and then you have one of the film lots, you have a set from one of my favorite horror films, or one of my favorite horror sequels, so that was an absolute highlight for me. And then you also have big mansions up in the hills. Everything about it in terms of creating this world, creating the 80s, it's just done to absolute perfection, and I applaud the people behind the costuming, the wardrobes, the setting, and the locations. It's just so good. I probably should have said at the beginning that I would highly recommend to watch X or to rewatch X before going in and watching this film, because we are following the character of Maxxine, but this is not just Maxxine a few years later down the line. It is, but it is Maxxine a few years later down the line, but also a direct sequel to X. The events from X, the journey that Maxxine went on in X, and also some other information that we were given in X is very important for this film. There are lots of references back to what happened, so I would say you will probably get more out of this if you have recently refreshed your memory with X. And talking of Maxxine, the other highlight for me with this film is the titular character. Maxxine is this incredible modern day badass superhero. She is honestly so good and so badass in this film. She is just so admirable, the way that they've written this character in terms of how she's developed from just who she is, but developed through her experiences in X. Everything about her makes sense and is just so inspiring. I just absolutely adore this character, and just to see her journey in this film, this is spoiler free, so I can't really get into it too much, but just in terms of this journey we followed her with, in terms of what she wants out of life, how hard she's willing to work for it, understanding the reality of the world that we live in and her as a woman in that world, just the choices that she makes, how she goes about living her life. It's just wonderful. And as I say, for me, I feel like this is a really good conclusion to her journey. I would be more than happy to revisit this world, whether that is Pearl, whether that is Maxxine. I would see more of these characters, but if this is all we get, then I'm happy with what they did with these characters that I love. But I did say at the beginning that this was kind of a mixed bag film for me, and there were a couple of negatives that I just want to touch on. Or maybe not negatives, but a mixed aspect. Okay, so the main negative for me is that while we're set in this world of Hollywood in the 80s, they touch upon the real life serial killer, the Night Stalker, who was a genuine terrifying threat for people at that time. And there is someone in this film. Every man and his dog is driving home now, apparently. In this film, there is somebody who is committing murders that is, sort of linked to Maxxine. And they're playing on the idea of, is this the Night Stalker? Is this somebody separate? And this person, the main story of Maxxine just ended up being really predictable. I'm sure other people will have cottoned on to this, but quite early on I figured out what that was going to be. And I think that whether you know it early or later, you know it, and you can then make your informed opinion on whether you think that is a good decision or not. But what makes it a negative is that it takes away any impact from the third act. It takes away any impact of the big reveal. And so to me, that was a negative. Another huge negative in this film for me is one particular character and one particular actor playing that character. The choices, I don't know whether it was down to Ty West or the actor, but the choices made in terms of portraying this character did not work for me at all. Tonally, how this character came across was so hammy and so over the top and so kind of like Sesame Street villain that it just did not fit with the tone of the rest of the film. Don't get me wrong, there were dark moments in this film and some bits that had me laughing, but this character, this actor, just it did not work with the rest of the film, and it really pulled me out of it. And another mixed aspect for me is that, unfortunately, and this could be partially my fault for putting so much expectation on the film, but to me, Maxxxine just never fully met its potential. Like, Pearl to me is a 5 out of 5 film. I love that film. And X is a 4 out of 5. And I liked it more on a rewatch. So I am thinking that maybe with a rewatch of Maxxxine, this will end up being a higher rating for me. But at the moment, I haven't rated it on Letterboxd yet, but I think it's going to be a 4 out of 5. And while there's nothing wrong with that, that is still a really good film. I still really enjoyed this. I just feel like for the final film, it maybe could have felt more epic. It maybe could have felt more large scale. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous because there is a large scaleness to the film, but it just could have felt a little bit more. But maybe that comes from the fact that Pearl and X were, put out in quite quick succession. And so this one's been a little bit longer. Maybe there's been that gap and they've pulled out of that world and then been put back in it. And maybe that's just affected the flow of it. And it's still an incredible film that I love, but it just never feels like it quite reaches pinnacle of what it could be. So mostly positives, a couple of mixed, and one negative for me that I think will probably change with a rewatch. And even if the film never quite reaches that pinnacle, I am still happy with the story that they gave Maxxxine. I'm still happy with the choices that they made with that character. But the main question is, does this film work as part of this trilogy, and does this film work as the final film? So like I said earlier, each film is so individually stylized that even though this one feels nothing like the others, it still feels like it fits because of that choice. And I would also say that this very much fits in terms of there are characters and there are themes threaded throughout this trilogy. Pearl is the way she is in X because of Pearl. Maxxxine is the way she is in Maxxxine because of X, but also because of things that happened before X that are referenced in X. Everything is threaded through beautifully. The mirroring between Pearl and Maxxxine continues through all of the films. So yes, it does feel like it's part of this trilogy, and it does feel like a good final film, I suppose. If I'm happy with where they go with it, with the way everything's wrapped up, with the conclusion of it, then I don't see how it can be anything other than a good conclusion to this trilogy. So those are my thoughts on Maxxxine. As I said, I am a big lover of this trilogy, so I think I was always going to find enjoyment in this film no matter what. But hopefully if you were sitting on the fence, this has helped you with your decision to whether you see it or not. In terms of, is it worth seeing on the big screen? I would say yes. This is a visually beautiful film, and I just think it is a really fun time. So this, I would say, is worth seeing on the big screen. If you've seen the film, let me know your thoughts down below, but as always, because this is a new release, do put a little spoiler warning above it in the comments, because there may be some people who haven't seen it yet. If you haven't seen it yet, is that because you just haven't a chance to? Are you definitely going to see it? And yeah, just let me know anything else, just your thoughts on this franchise. I know it's not for everybody, but I really want to talk about this film, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you're new here and found me through this episode, then please do give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you can join the What the Horror family and don't miss out on any further content. This Sunday will be the 10 most shocking deaths in horror movies, so keep an eye out for that one. And if you would like to join this list of lovely names here and get extra content every single week on top of everything on this channel, then there will be a link to my Patreon page in the description box below. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode.